get to GCC High, it is a full migration. There's no way to convert from a commercial tenant to a GCC High tenant. Think of them as separate tenants, and the only way to move is a migration process. It is a full lift and shift. It is going to be disruptive if you're moving everybody and everything. Welcome to Demystifying Microsoft, a podcast by the SourcePath Center of Excellence for Microsoft. We believe Microsoft shouldn't be hard. Each week, we break down what's changing across the Microsoft ecosystem, help you solve your toughest challenges, and provide clear, actionable advice to keep you ahead of the curve. If you're responsible for Microsoft decisions and want clarity without complexity, you're in the right place. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Demystifying Microsoft podcast. Today, I am joined by the lovely Miss Lindsay. How are you, Lindsay?
I am good. It's a Friday today before a holiday weekend, so that's always exciting.
It is a great thing. I'm very happy about the same thing, but it's also a lot of fun to talk with you about a topic that we get a lot of phone calls about. And that topic is Microsoft's government licensing, also known as GCC, GCC High, AOSG. Yeah, we joked about this episode that it could be a drinking game and you just take a drink every time there's a three-letter acronym, a four-letter acronym, and you'd be laying on your back by the end of this episode. So lots to cover, but a lot of people have interest in getting into Microsoft's Government Community Cloud. That's what GCC stands for, Government Community Cloud. The idea here is that Microsoft has these additional tiers of products that satisfy Microsoft government compliance qualifications around how you can use clouds and services in the cloud for government organizations. A lot of that's going to be around your CMMC level 2, your ITAR. We have a number of customers in the tribal space that like to use these clouds. And so it's a lot of details. It's a confusing topic. You want to understand, like, how do you qualify? How do you purchase it? Is it the same? Can I just convert my tenant? Can I just migrate? Does being in the cloud make me compliant, or does it make me more secure? Is it a more secure version? A lot of questions, a lot of things to talk about, pricing and capabilities. So we're going to start by talking about what are the different tiers of Microsoft Cloud out there in this context. So we know the commercial tier is what everybody is running on. That's your standard Microsoft 365. You can go to office365.com and sign up, or through a partner. That's commercial licensing. So Lindsay, why don't you tell us about tier 1, which is Microsoft 365 GCC?
So GCC we consider as the entry point for Microsoft's government cloud. GCC is a dedicated U.S. government cloud instance. So it is completely separate from commercial infrastructure, but it is built on Azure commercial infrastructure. So there's a huge difference there. The data isn't going to reside on the same servers as other commercial Microsoft tenants. It is dedicated to the US government, but the infrastructure itself is built on Azure commercial. It does, of course, have logical segregation. All customer data is stored and processed exclusively in the US data centers and administrated by screened US personnel. So that's one of the requirements for a lot of entities who are interested in exploring GCC. That's one of the boxes, of course, it checks there. It does use standard Microsoft Entra ID in the commercial cloud. So the domains for your tenant will still end in .onmicrosoft.com, which really makes external collaboration a lot easier. As you talk through GCC High, that does change a little bit. So with GCC, there's more opportunity for collaboration there. It does also meet FedRAMP moderate requirements, which is suitable for federal contract information, CGIS, IRS 1075, and other moderate impact data. It's not for ITAR, not for CUI. So you'll, of course, touch on that. It also has nearly 90% feature parity with commercial versions of Microsoft 365. So when we talk about Microsoft government licensing, there are sometimes some limitations between feature sets. GCC is where we're going to see the most linear features between government, and commercial. And they're always rolling out new features there.
Yeah, absolutely. What kind of entities tend to use the GCC tier of Microsoft 365?
It's typically U.S. civilian agencies, state and local government, or tribal governments. We also see a lot of government contractors that handle sensitive but non-ITAR data. So there's a lot more clients that are eligible for GCC than GCC High. The authorization process is a little bit different there. But a lot of our clients, as you mentioned, are in the tribal space, and GCC is a really, really great option for them.
It fits well for other regulated industries like healthcare, education, law enforcement. It covers a lot of the compliance requirements around data sovereignty and who's accessing the data, but it's not quite high enough for some of the more common reasons we're getting approached for it. And for those scenarios, we're hearing a lot of people looking for GCC High. Now, GCC High is a big change from GCC where it is definitely more restrictive, more expensive. And so we'll talk through that. So as opposed to GCC being built in the commercial data centers with segregation, these are built in physically separate Azure government infrastructure, completely isolated from the commercial cloud. So it's really much more designed around being really sure about what data is where and who can access it. So data sovereignty is US only data centers and US citizens with deep background checks. And that background checks becomes the citizens piece becomes important for CMMC. ITAR has also US sovereign requirements, but CMMC is looking for citizens. So it checks some of those boxes that are required for some of those regulated industries. The identity is separate. It is a .onmicrosoft.us. So every portal you get into will be azure.us or admin.microsoft.us. So it is a very different access process. It's a very separate set of resources. Now, what it's great for is FedRAMP High, is DFAR 7012, NIST 800-171 for CUI and CMMC Level 2, ITAR, EAR, DoD, IL4. It hits a lot of your requirements from a compliance level. So if you're looking to get into those spaces, this can be a critical step, is getting to the GCC High. It has maybe a 90% functional parity with commercial M365. It's definitely less than commercial or GCC. They are a different code base. Their features come slower. You're going to find some of the newer features in the Microsoft Commercial Cloud take a while to get to GCC High, if they ever get there. The other big difference is there's no native PSTN calling. So you're going to have to use a direct routing provider if you want to use Teams Voice. There are a lot of restrictions on external collaboration. You can only talk to other GCC High DoD tenants. You can't do things like Teams chat, or even some of the SharePoint stuff is very much limited in what you can do with external resources. Like I said, feature rollout is definitely 8 to 16 weeks later. And there's third-party app compatibility issues, which I think is a really big thing to call out. You've got a favorite security tool or a SOC or SIM tool, or maybe an assessment tool or a management tool. Those tools have to support not only different API versions, but different API URLs. And you need to confirm whether your tools are compatible with the GCC High cloud. And a lot of them don't have feature parity for those environments.
I was going to say, I know you have a lot of conversations with clients about this, and everything you just went over, it sounds like a lot of limitations. And obviously, as we speak to IT leaders, they understand that. But what guidance have you provided those IT team leaders to provide to their broader teams? I remember when Copilot first came out and our GCC High customers were so frustrated because it wasn't available to them. So what type of guidance have you provided to help bridge that gap between there are some limitations within your tenant, but it's beneficial because?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to approach it. The most important thing is to really understand proper deployment of GCC High. A lot of customers come to us and say, hey, I need to move to GCC High. And of course, we'll support that conversation. We will sell it to you. We'll help you migrate. But the first conversation I'm going to have is why? Oh, well, I got to be CMMC compliant. I appreciate that. I understand that's a requirement for your business, but you have 300 users. Do you need them all to be in the compliant environment? Well, yeah, just be easier if that's the case. Well, that's not always true. It's a more expensive license. It has a much more restricted feature set. It's harder to live in. You're not getting the latest and greatest. So let's talk about your business and figure out, do we need all 300 users in GCC High, or can we enclave that down to the 25 users in your business that need access to the data requiring the standards. And that's where you get into compliance. You really need to make sure you work on understanding your scope. If you're a CMMC company, where is your CUI and who needs access to it? You got all this CUI floating around. Does the entire company need it? Does the front desk person need it? Does the HR person need it? Does the maintenance person need it? Do the field techs need it? I don't know. If you could figure out that, oh, well, it turns out it's a small subset of what we do. I've got a couple project managers and a couple people who are building the product who need access. There's a lot of value in saying, okay, then can we scope this and run a parallel tenant where you keep your normal users in commercial 365, and you put a subset of your users in a GCC High enclave. That accomplishes a couple things. Number one, it limits the impact of those restrictions because you can say, hey, the CUI data is going to live there, and the part of your job that requires the CUI data is going to live in that enclave. But the rest of your life, you can be in commercial and just live like a normal employee. The second thing is when you actually go to start working on becoming compliant and want to go pull somebody in, and we have a division at SourcePass called SourcePass Shield where we're doing CMMC level 2 compliance for customers, and we hope to be CMMC level 2 certified as an MSP for SourcePass Shield by end of Q3 of 2026. For those scenarios, when you go to build your compliance documents, you want to go get CMMC level 2. It is a very, very big jump to get there. There are 110 controls. There's a million details you have to get right. And every variable you add makes that harder. So if you want to cover your entire business, now we got to talk about every firewall, every endpoint, every security decision, every third-party app. Do you have policies to make sure that CUI never accidentally leaks over here, or moves over there, or gets opened over there, or gets shared this way? By doing an enclave, you often can take those issues you were talking about, Lindsay. Long answer to your question. You can take those issues of expense and feature limited capabilities and say, hey, we're really going to put those only for the data that requires it. And that would be that ITAR, CMMC level 2 CUI data that's driving your scenario. It's often better to put it into an enclave.
That makes complete sense. And I apologize, I interrupted you because I know you're about to dive in types of clients that GCC High is a good fit for. So go ahead.
Yes. Well, and we've just talked about it, right? It's primarily aimed at the defense industrial base, right? So we're talking DoD contractors, aerospace and defense manufacturers, anybody who has CUI has to be under the NIST 800-171 standards, companies with ITAR or EAR, export control data, CMMC level 2 and 3. And that really leads us to a clarification, which is GCC High isn't more secure. That's one of the common misconceptions we'll come back to a couple of times. It's not that it's more secure. It's a lot of the same capabilities, and your GCC High tenant is only as secure as how you've configured it. It's just like a commercial tenant. There's a lot of buttons to switch to make it secure. What is different is that it is compliance guarantees about data residency, isolations, and who can touch it. When you start looking into the ITAR and this CUI controls, it's all about who's allowed to get to this data and can you prove that? Can you prove who accessed it and what they did with it? And so it's really about those compliance side, not the security side. It, of course, is going to be more secure because there's less capabilities and some of these things are locked down and they've locked some of that down. But in general, it's not a security play, it's a compliance play.
Absolutely. And again, it's not guaranteeing compliance, but it's helping with your posture to get to the level of compliance that an organization needs. It does, of course, require setting it up in that specific manner.
You'll find that with an assessment. If you're in commercial cloud, there have been companies that have been CMMC certified level 2 on the commercial cloud, but you have to show so many more controls. There's a base in the assessment when you go, my cloud is hosted in a FedRAMP GCC High environment. And for the assessor, that means you can go, oh, that means I've got all these questions answered. Now, I still have a bunch of questions for you to answer, but it's a clean answer to some specific things that in the commercial environment, you have to have a lot more controls to prove. So it definitely helps with the scope.
I know that we've, of course, on other podcast episodes discussed our Microsoft 365 security assessment. If I'm a GCC High customer, can I still do that assessment with our team?
We can do your assessment. It is going to be a more manual process because as I talked about, those URLs in GCC High are different. And so our favorite assessment tool that really allows us to move quickly in commercial tenants does not support the GCC High APIs and URLs. So we can take the information we've learned there, almost all the controls we go through, we can manually go through those and go review those. And that's what we do on the Shield side is we help customers take their tenants and we harden them. And we go through a checklist of things we recommend hardening. So we can get to the same place. It's just a much more manual process.
Got it. And what about Azure Gov? So how does this fit into the picture?
Yeah, Azure has kind of 2 tiers instead of 3. And actually, we'll get to it in a second. But Microsoft has 4 tiers on the 365 side. Azure is 2. You've got your Azure Commercial and your Azure Gov. It's a little simpler on that side. It's the same stuff. It's the same sort of variables. It's Azure's environment. It's delayed on features. It's a little bit more expensive. You have to qualify to use it. Azure Gov supports FedRAMP High and DoD IL5. So ITAR, EAR, CMMC are supported in Azure Gov. Again, you've got to qualify for it. We found it tends to be easier to get qualified for your Microsoft 365 GCC High tenant and then add the Azure on the back of it, because that GCC High tenant technically already has Azure Gov identity in the intra ID. So bolting on the subscription is a lot easier in those scenarios, but Azure Gov can be procured separately.
That makes sense.
Let me share a table with you real quick. So we've got this table here, and this is from one of our awesome suppliers. So we do a lot of work with Pax8, does a lot of work with us in this space, and we buy all our licensing through these guys. This is a table that kind of lays it out on a table view, and I know for our more visual users, this might be helpful. You've got your commercial, which is available for any user, your GCC, which covers the tribes, federal contract information. We've got our GCC High, which is for DIB and our CMMC and our ITAR customers, and then Microsoft 365, which is DoD only, and I'm not even sure we can sell that. I don't think we have access. I think there's probably a very limited number of companies that can sell that. You can see that data centers can be US or continental US and continental US. For commercial, these are continental US only, so that's a big difference. Which FedRAMP they cover, which different controls are in place. You can see FedRAMP High is across the board. So that's cool to see that the commercial cloud is FedRAMP, but it's the controls around other things. You start to see these no's on the left that turn to yes as you go to the right on these various controls around the different covers, different compliance layers, including the CGIS agreement. You could see that there's a different level of CGIS agreement on those different SKUs. And then these are key details. Customer support is on the worldwide commercial side. For commercial and Azure Gov, GCC High and DoD are US-based only. So that's a key reason why ITAR and CMMC require GCC High. And then the directory network, you can see it's a commercial network on these two, and it's a Gov, Azure Gov on that side. While I'm sharing my screen, let's go look at this real quick. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in a second. But in order to qualify, you have to get approved by Microsoft first. So Microsoft has this form. It's their Government Community Cloud Eligibility Intake Form. You can show what you're doing. You can kind of tell where you fit into this layer. So let's say you're looking for just a general, you're providing data there. This would be more of the GCC High, the GCC validation. This is the GCC High. And then I haven't messed with this one, but you can fill out your form. You choose your general validation. You come here, and then you fill in your organization information here. And I think it'll auto-fill for me because I'll get you to the next page. But then you get through and you bring them the supporting docs. I'm not going to show that on the screen here. It's going to take me a second to fill it out. But on that next screen, then you show your validation. How are you showing that you are a valid supplier that is entitled to use this software? Most commonly, the easiest way to get there is if you have a cage code, if you're trying to get to GCC High. It's a well-known capability of the government to prove you're doing government work. It's kind of the easy button for getting into GCC High. Microsoft's going to validate that very quickly. And it's a commercial and government entity code. So it's a unique identifier assigned to suppliers. So that means you've done the work where Microsoft already recognizes you as a known supplier. So if you're going this route, that's one of the things we would recommend is if you could get your cage code or you're close to getting your cage code, it really helps the process, because otherwise they're going to ask for a lot of verification that you are a qualifying government entity to use GCC High. It is illegal to use GCC High for non-government functionality. Maybe I'm being a little strong there, but I think there is some pretty strong language in the conversation of, hey, this is meant for people doing work with the government, and it's not to be played with. It's a government community cloud, and that's what it's meant for. So let's talk about the licensing models. Lindsay, are we buying the same products? What does licensing and procurement look like in the cloud? And specifically, we can start with GCC.
So the SKU structure is very similar. You'll notice with GCC licensing, instead of Microsoft 365 E3, which is enterprise, they actually title this is beginning with a G. So Microsoft 365 G1, G3, G5. Again, similar features to the plans on the commercial side, but there are a couple distinct differences from that security perspective. What's really exciting is in 2025, Microsoft released Business Premium for GCC and government customers as well, which is a huge game changer because of all of the security features when it comes to identity management, device protection, etc. So we're super excited about that. The purchasing channels are pretty standard, very linear to what you're seeing on the Microsoft 365 commercial side of things. We always recommend purchasing through a partner like ourselves. Microsoft does, of course, offer enterprise agreements, CSP, Web Direct for those smaller clients looking to purchase just individually online. There is just a slight pricing difference as well. So there's about a 10 to 15% pricing premium over the commercial equivalents. So sometimes we hear clients come to us and just automatically assume like, oh, government licensing, I'm going to get better pricing. That's not necessarily the case. But if you are new to Microsoft, we always suggest taking advantage of promos or trials. We, of course, have access to all of those tools. So you can really approach our team with that.
Absolutely. For GCC High, it's similar, but as we've talked about, more complex, right? As we move into the GCC High.
Similar, but different.
So you're going to hear the phrase AOSG, Agreement for Online Services Government. That's some of the form we just showed you where you're going through and validating you. A GCC High is not available for public sign up or standard CSP. You must have authorization. Not every partner can sell it. We can sell it to you. Not every partner can. There's not really any testing. It is all annual upfront. So you are going to pay for those licenses upfront annually at the beginning of your subscription. So not only is it upfront, but it's also 50 to 70% more than commercial equivalents. So getting into GCC High is an expensive jump, and you got to have the cash to do it upfront. So that's where we really talk about another reason to talk about enclaving. Do you really need to move your whole entity over there? Or are you ready to spend the money to have everybody in a more expensive license and pay for it upfront? As you said, there's a really great, Microsoft has added the small business SKUs into the GCC High environment. So I can do Business Premium for GCC High. I can do Defender and Purview Suite for GCC High. We recommend you're going to go do GCC High. You're probably going to want Premium and the Defender and Purview Suites because you need all those controls for whatever compliance you're getting to. So we're not going to sell a lot of real basic licenses in this environment because you're never going to hit your compliance goals. But it is nice that for smaller orgs, you're not having to go straight to M365 G5 because it is a jump. It is an expensive jump to buy those up front. And I'm thrilled to see the small business licenses available through GCC High. Again, we talked about you got to get approval. That can take 2 days to 2 weeks, depending on your documentation completeness. Once we get that approval key, we can go build you that environment. Microsoft creates the tenant. The tenants get created slower. We can create a 365 tenant in commercial literally in minutes. It takes longer to do this in GCC High. There's some process to it. There's some email back and forth. Then we got to go activate it and then get you into your tenant. So anytime you start getting into the GCC High level, expect things to be more expensive, to get features slower, and to take longer to do all the same things as far as setup and procurement and deployment. Azure Gov is similar. Like I said, it's a lot easier when we already have a Microsoft 365 tenant because then we can go reference that tenant and that domain when we go to procure it. The partners that sell Azure Gov are sometimes different. Not everybody is selling GCC High and Azure Gov, so we have to work through those wrinkles. We can sell you both, but Azure Gov, you go procure it. If you already have your GCC High Microsoft tenant, it's easier. So it's a little easier to procure. And again, the pricing is generally a little higher than commercial Azure pricing. We do see a lot of people who go this route, and I'll just call this out, that if you're in GCC High and you're wanting to build an enclave and it's for a subset of your users, a common use case is to run AVD in Azure Gov so that you can have your users have a desktop environment that's fully in the enclave and compliant and controlled. So maybe they've got their commercial laptop and they do their commercial email and their commercial teams and all their commercial products on their laptop. When they have to work with CUI or ITAR data, they remote into the Azure Gov instance and access the GCC High 365 instance from within that remote desktop window, which allows you to put a lot of controls that validate your CMMC or ITAR compliance around data control, the ability to copy it, the ability to move the data, take the data out. It's all isolated in that environment. So very common for us to procure them together.
So let's get practical here, because I know we've mentioned compliance several times. And isn't commercial Microsoft, aren't there some, can't it meet some compliance needs? And how do you know if a customer truly needs government licensing or a government environment?
I think it really comes down to what's the data you are handling, right? So you got to understand what you're working with. Are you working with federal contract information? Are you working with CUI, which is controlled unclassified information, or ITAR, EAR export data? Each bit of data has its own set of rules. And as a business, hopefully you've started to understand that. We can give you some level of understanding, but if it gets too deep, we also will be very careful to pull in some experts to give you some guidance on that. And we have a few of those on our team. There's a couple common things driving it. A lot of the GCC is around federal tax information, sensitive healthcare information, tribal state government stuff. And usually those teams know what their data is and understand the rules around that. We're seeing CUI driving a lot of things. CMMC is a standard that's starting to be enforced across the entire defense industrial base. The government is starting to only being able to pay contracts to primes and subcontractors that are CMMC level 2 certified. And so that's driving a lot of change in the industry. And we're seeing a lot of people wrestling with that. That CUI, though the CMMC and the 800-171 rules have a lot of restrictions about controlling access to that data. And that's really driving the idea there. And so we got a couple levels here. You could talk about different levels, but the interesting thing about CMMC level 2 that we're seeing is there's a lot of indications that is going to move beyond the defense industrial base and the Department of Defense and move into other federal entities that want to control access to data. So an example would be the federal government has gotten very particular about what you do with, for example, building plans for federal facilities. You're a contractor pouring concrete on a federal facility. They're starting to write in a lot of restrictions about how you control access to that data. They don't want a foreign government knowing exactly how that State Department building was built so they can blow it up in a war, right? They want to keep that data private and secret and classified. So we're seeing CMMC level 2 start to maybe be the standard we see in places other than the DoD. And so that makes it interesting as we start to say, okay, so other entities will still have that same requirement. Again, this is a compliance standard which has a lot of security aspects, but it's really about being in compliance. And that compliance is almost always around who can access that data, and are they U.S. citizens, and can you audit that and prove that? Does that data stay on U.S. soil? It's a lot of these controls that drive moving into these environments is around data sovereignty and data access and data control.
That makes sense. And what are some of the biggest mistakes you see companies making when they're choosing between GCC and GCC High licensing?
Yeah, I think you need to understand the regulations you're under. Right? We've talked about this. If CMMC level 2, GCC does not do you much good. GCC High is what you need. If you're ITAR, you definitely need to make sure in GCC High. And ITAR has some pretty strong criminal penalties around it. It's pretty serious in violating ITAR rules. So I think it's misunderstanding the requirements they're trying to meet. It's hard to understand these things. There's a lot of details, and it's complicated because you got to understand government regulations. You got to understand contracting rules. Now you got to understand IT and technology decisions. I'm in the government cloud, so that's good enough, right? No, it really does come down to the details of proving who can access what. And if it's CMMC, then GCC doesn't move the needle enough. You really want GCC High. I think the other thing is that people just go, well, I don't really do any government work. Well, you need to understand what you're doing. If you're taking a contract, does your contract cover that? And that's where things like CMMC level 1 come in place, where they may just cover contract information. But it's important to understand your exposure here. And then the other piece is what we talked about earlier. People think, okay, well, if I have to do this, then let's just go all the way. We're just going to move to GCC High. It'll be fine. It's not only more expensive, it has less features, but migrating is a big challenge. And then we're going to talk about that in a minute, but the migration is not simple.
I think we should dive into the migration process, because I think that's another big myth that we see, where organizations all of a sudden realize that they need GCC or GCC High. And if they already have a commercial tenant, it's not an easy transfer process. It does require movement of that data. So would love for you to walk through that process a little bit as well.
Yes, absolutely. So to get to GCC High, it is a full migration. There's no way to convert from a commercial tenant to a GCC High tenant. And I'm sure there's a number of reasons there. Microsoft's got separate ways they manage it, separate data centers. And the same is true with GCC. You can't convert from commercial to GCC or from commercial to GCC High, and you can't convert from the other direction. Think of them as separate tenants, and the only way to move is a migration process. The other wrinkle to keep in mind is that migrating from commercial to GCC tenants can be done with most commercial tools, but to go from commercial to GCC High tenants, there's only a couple tools that support that. And part of the reason is those tenants also need to be GCC High, be FedRAMP High. They require the same compliance level because they're touching your data. Your data is transiting their systems while they're moving from your commercial tenant to the GCC High tenant. They also have to support those GCC High URLs and APIs. So there's a limited number of tools. It is a full lift and shift. It is going to be disruptive if you're moving everybody and everything. Again, you're going to lose features as you go through that. And so we really encourage people to really understand that. And again, I want to harp on one of my favorite topics is if you can enclave, it takes away a lot of this challenge because then you can go, we're spin up our GCC tenant, we're going to identify our CUI and we're just moving that. Now we're talking about moving 100 gigabytes of data or whatever you have from tenant to tenant instead of every email, every Teams message, every SharePoint file, every OneDrive file. It is a massive migration to get from one tenant to the other and is worth understanding before you jump into that. Let's see, a couple things. We talked about some other things to keep in mind. Obviously, you don't get Teams phone, and that's something people don't think about. They just assume they can do phone Teams calling in GCC High. The Teams phone system's available, but the routing has to be done through a GCC High third party. So there's a number of players that can do direct routing for you. That's a variable you need to factor into your migration plan. So definitely worth planning through and understanding your requirements and your limitations as you go through it.
Perfect. And I always love to run through common misconceptions and ways that our team can help address them because we get so many questions and I know it's always the same questions. So let's bust some of these myths here. Let's play Mythbusters. Misconception number 1, GCC High is just a more secure version of commercial Microsoft 365. As we discussed, these are separate compliance-driven environments, not security upgrades. So they exist to meet specific frameworks with US-only data residency and screened personnel access. Security features are similar across commercial and government, but the difference is compliance, isolation, and data sovereignty. So clients may think that they're adding security when they're actually just entering a regulated environment with constraints. So we want to set those expectations early.
Yeah, and it's a common conversation we have in the IT space that compliance does not equal security. A more compliant environment tends to be more secure. A more secure environment tends to be more compliant. But compliance is aligning with a set of regulations about whatever they're regulating. Oftentimes they're regulating security, but compliance does not equal security. I will make decisions to hit a compliance thing that I may not make if I'm just fully focused on security. So it's important to recognize that those are different things. And in this case, that's really important because the GCC and GCC High are compliance changes that bring maybe minor security upgrades. But as we've talked about, the security is a separate conversation and is not the primary reason you're making that change.
Another misconception we get a lot is clients that say, well, if we want to be compliant, we should just go to GCC High to be safe. And I know you've touched on this already, but just to reiterate, what are your thoughts there?
Well, back to our first comment, if you don't understand your scope and you don't understand what you're aligning with, then you may be making a very expensive mistake and you find yourself in a spot where you are happy with the outcome. You move your 300 users to a GCC High tenant to become more compliant, and then you realize that your scope is too big to get to CMMC level 2 based on your business, and you've still got to figure out how to limit that scope to make it compliant. And now everybody's stuck in a way more expensive, less capable platform, and you're not any closer to your compliance goals. So it's really important that you talk to a qualified team like Source Patch Shield that can sit down and walk you through the assessment and say, Where's your data? What is it? What are the requirements around it? What's your contractual requirements? How do we scope this so that this is achievable? Because getting into GCC High does not make you safer and does not always bring you closer to your compliance. It is when used properly. So it's a tool, but a tool is only helpful when it's used properly.
Perfect. We also work with lots of clients of varying sizes, right? I vividly remember a company of 3 users coming to us and asking about government licensing, and they had the misconception that small companies just don't qualify for GCC or GCI. So as a reminder, size does not matter whatsoever. Eligibility does. So even small organizations can qualify if they meet those requirements. There's no strict minimum user requirements. So that's just something to keep in the back of the mind. There are no minimums. So as you talk about the enclaves as well, that's a good thing to keep in mind because you don't need to have a large set of users.
Exactly. Great call out. Another misconception is that GCC makes us compliant. Now that I'm in GCC, I'm CMMC FedRAMP compliance. Again, an environment that supports compliance does not equal you are compliant. So Microsoft is vouching for the things they control. GCC High is Microsoft vouching for the people accessing it, and the data centers are US only, US citizens are background checked. They're handling the pieces they control. But all of the configuration, the policies, the procedures, all the things that really make up a compliance program are yours. Microsoft's providing compliant plumbing. You're the one who's hooking up into the house and building the house. Capitalists. The plumbing is all they're vouching for at that point. So it's important to keep that in mind. That just because you're in that GCC tenant does not mean you're compliant or even closer to being compliant.
To learn more about
the fact that GCC does not have the same features. It's a common misconception. Oh, you just go to GCC, all have the same things. And you're going to feel it in the fun stuff.
And if you haven't already,
feature, the new Teams feature, the new hotness Microsoft's announcing at Build here in a couple weeks.
YouTube,
that's the stuff that takes longer to get to the GCC environments.
Never miss an episode.
Another misconception we see as well is that any company can buy GCC licensing.
Thanks for being here.
Again, GCC does require eligibility validation. And coming from experience, I remember as a young seller, confirming eligibility early is the best thing that you can do. There's nothing worse than working with a client. They're already envisioning this GCC environment and how they're going to set everything up, and then perhaps they are not eligible. So confirming eligibility early is highly recommended. It takes little to no time. As you mentioned, that cage code is great. And typically Microsoft responds back with eligibility in about 2 to 4 days, I believe.
Absolutely. Again, misconception, another one we've talked about, switching to GCC is just a license change. Nope, it is a full migration. It's a new tenant. It's a completely different tenant. So again, you're going to need to scope a migration, a new environment, reconfiguring everything. If you want to move your domain, you're going to have to schedule that, pull the domain off the old tenant, move it to the new one. There's a lot of details there. So as always, with everything we've talked about here, we are definitely stepping into areas that are complex, right? Compliance, federal compliance, ITAR, CUI, CMMC. I am not a CMMC certified professional. I know enough to be dangerous. We have some CCPs on staff who do know things about, we're certified in CMMC. So as you get into this, if you want to have deeper conversations, SourcePath Shield is our division that manages this, and they would love to talk with you if you have further questions. Can really help you through the details of this. And most of the time that leads to a conversation of, hey, we probably need to do an assessment. Let's look at your contracts. Let's understand your data. What do you know what CUIT you have? Okay, what are you trying to do? Where are you going? But it is important to pull in professionals who understand this well. We as your Microsoft partner are there for you and can navigate the things we understand. We can't make all these decisions for you from a compliance perspective. Obviously, you as a business owner are liable for the decisions you make. So it's important you have really well-versed people helping you make these decisions. Would love to help you every step of the way, but make sure you've got the right people in your court to make sure you're making the right decisions, because the government's making this more and more of a thing. We're pushing harder and harder on this because they want to secure our data as a nation. They want to make sure our sensitive data stays secure, and we're here to support that. So we'd love to have further conversations with you. Happy to help you procure all these licenses we can sell, GCC, GCC High, and Azure Gov, and would be happy to walk you through these variables. So reach out if you have further questions. Lindsay, it's been a pleasure. Your wealth of knowledge on this topic, and you're one of the first voices people will speak to if they do want help on this topic. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if you noticed, I was drinking my coffee throughout. I know to do it on the acronyms because I'm not participating in your drinking game, but I think it'd be really fun if anyone out there participated in that.
It's a little early on a Friday to be drinking, but that doesn't stop everybody. So great stuff. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for those who have made it through this long episode as we talk about a pretty heady topic. And we look forward to catching you on the next episode of the Demystifying Microsoft podcast. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you for joining us on Demystifying Microsoft, brought to you by the SourcePath Center of Excellence for Microsoft. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen so you don't miss an episode. If you would like to talk to one of our Microsoft problem solvers, click on the link in the episode description or contact our team at sourcepathmcoe.com. Thank you.